I will never touch you again. The chandelier above her head shimmered like a cruel joke, scattering light across the marble floor as if the universe itself was mocking her. Every crystal sparkled with obscene wealth, every reflection reminding her that this wedding, this spectacle, was not about love or choice or joy. It was about sacrifice. And she was the one being offered. Elena Hart stood in front of the mirror, her hands trembling as they clutched the edge of the vanity. The wedding dress fit her perfectly, custom-made, imported lace, hand-stitched pearls, but it felt like a costume meant for someone else's life. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and hollow-eyed, a young woman dressed as a bride yet already mourning something unnamed. The makeup artist dabbed at her cheekbones, praising her beauty, telling her how lucky she was, how many women would give anything to stand where she stood now. Lucky. The word echoed bitterly in her mind. 3 months earlier, her father had sat across from her at their small kitchen table, his shoulders slumped, his hands shaking as he wrapped them around a chipped coffee mug. The house smelled of burnt toast and old memories. He hadn't looked at her at first. When he finally did, his eyes were wet with shame. I failed, he'd said, his voice cracking. I trusted the wrong people. The business is gone. The bank is taking the house. I don't know what to do anymore. Elena remembered reaching for his hand, telling him they would figure it out, that they always did. But then he had spoken the name that changed everything. Victor Langford. A man she barely knew except through headlines and whispered conversations. A man twice her emotional age, surrounded by power and silence. He had offered a solution. Not a loan. Not help. A marriage. He says it's a merger, her father had whispered. Between families. He'll cover the debts. Everything. But he wants you. Elena had laughed at first, thinking it was some sick misunderstanding. But the look on her father's face had crushed that hope instantly. He hadn't begged. He hadn't demanded. That was worse. He had simply looked broken. I won't survive losing everything again, he said quietly. But I won't force you. I swear. She remembered the long silence that followed. The weight of it. The realization that love sometimes cornered you into choices that felt like slow executions. She said yes that night. Now she stood at the altar of that decision. The ballroom was overflowing with guests. Politicians, investors, socialites dressed in smiles sharper than knives. Cameras flashed. Music swelled. Everything was designed to look perfect. Todo cambiable. Victor Langford waited at the front. Tall. Immaculate. Untouchable. His tailored black suit fit him like armor. His face was handsome in a cold, deliberate way, carved by discipline rather than warmth. When Elena's eyes met his, there was no affection, no curiosity, only appraisal. As if she were a document he had already signed. He did not smile when she reached him. He simply took her hand. The ceremony passed like a dream she couldn't wake from. The vows felt heavy in her mouth. Each word tasted like surrender. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Victor leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. It lasted less than a second. No tenderness. No heat. Just obligation. Applause erupted. Cameras clicked. Elena smiled because she had practiced that smile in the mirror, wide enough to look happy, shallow enough not to reveal despair. At the reception, Victor barely spoke to her. He discussed deals and acquisitions with men who congratulated him like he had just purchased a rare asset. When guests addressed Elena, Victor's hand would settle on her back, firm and possessive, guiding her responses, steering her body, reminding her who owned the narrative. She felt invisible. Later, his mother cornered her. Margaret Langford was elegance sharpened into cruelty. Her silver hair was pulled back so tightly it looked painful, and her eyes were cold with inherited authority. You should be grateful, Margaret said softly, smiling for anyone who might be watching. My son does not make sentimental decisions. You were chosen because you are acceptable. Elena swallowed. You will represent this family with grace, Margaret continued. You will not embarrass us. And you will remember that everything you now have exists because of our generosity. She patted Elena's hand like one might soothe a nervous pet. The party eventually ended. Guests left with laughter and promises to meet again. Elena's father hugged her tightly, his body trembling as if he already sensed what he had traded away. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I love you. She wanted to tell him she was fine. She wanted to lie. But all she could do was hold him and let him go. The house fell silent. Victor did not offer his arm as they climbed the staircase. Their footsteps echoed through the mansion, each step pulling Elena further from the girl she used to be. The master bedroom was massive, dark wood and deep shadows swallowing the light. Victor poured himself a drink. "Take off the dress," he said casually. "It's expensive. I want it stored properly." Her fingers fumbled at the zipper. She couldn't reach it. With visible irritation, Victor stepped forward and yanked it down. The dress slid away, pooling at her feet like shed skin. Elena felt exposed, humiliated, and rushed into the bathroom, clutching the fabric like it was the last thing she owned. When she returned in a robe, Victor was seated, watching her with a detached expression. "I assume you think this is where I touch you," he said. "Where I pretend this is some romantic fantasy." He stood and approached her, stopping just inches away. "Let me be clear," he said quietly. "This marriage is a transaction. You saved your father. I gained a wife who looks good beside me." He leaned closer. "I will never touch you again." The word struck harder than a slap. "You will sleep in a separate room," he continued. "You will appear when required. You will smile. In private, you are nothing to me." Elena felt her chest tighten, tears threatening to fall, but she forced them back. She refused to break in front of him. Victor smirked. "Third door on the left," he said. "Don't disturb me." She walked away on shaking legs. That night, Elena cried silently on the floor of a room that felt more like a cell than a sanctuary. Her wedding night ended not with love, but with rejection so absolute it carved itself into her bones. The next morning, a note waited beneath her door. "Breakfast at 8. Do not be late. I will show you how to be a proper wife." As Elena stared at the words, something unfamiliar stirred beneath the grief. A quiet, fragile defiance. She did not know it yet, but this was not the end of her story. It was the beginning. "Learn your place." Morning light spilled through the tall windows of the mansion, but it did nothing to warm Elena Hart's chest. She woke slowly, her body stiff from sleeping curled on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, her mind already heavy with dread before her eyes even opened. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then the silence reminded her. Not the peaceful silence of a home, but the hollow quiet of a place where she did not belong. She rose, washed her face, and stared at herself in the mirror. The girl who looked back seemed older than she had been the day before. Not wiser. Just worn. Her eyes carried something new now, a guardedness born overnight. At exactly 8 o'clock, she entered the breakfast room. Margaret Langford sat perfectly upright at the table, newspaper folded with military precision, porcelain cup poised delicately in her hand. She did not look up when Elena entered. "You're on time," Margaret said. "That's a start." Elena sat where she was instructed. A maid poured her coffee without meeting her eyes, as if acknowledging Elena would cost her something. Margaret finally looked up then, slowly, deliberately, her gaze sweeping over Elena from head to toe. "That dress is acceptable," she said. "But don't mistake adequacy for excellence." Elena nodded quietly. "Victor will be gone most of the week," Margaret continued. "Which means you will spend that time learning how this family operates. You will attend the charities I select. You will speak only when spoken to. You will never reveal private matters to outsiders. And you will not embarrass us." Her eyes sharpened. "You are not here because of love. You are here because you were necessary. Remember that." The words settled like chains around Elena's shoulders. Days passed. Then weeks. The mansion became a maze of rules. What to wear. How to stand. When to smile. What topics were acceptable. Which doors she could open. Which rooms were off limits. Elena felt like a guest in her own marriage, tolerated only as long as she performed correctly. Victor was rarely home. When he was, he treated her with polite distance, as though she were a decorative item that required minimal maintenance. He never raised his voice. He never insulted her directly. His cruelty was colder than that, precise, intentional, dismissive. At social events, people admired her, complimented her poise, whispered about how lucky she was. If only they knew. At night, Elena lay awake listening to Victor's footsteps pass her door without slowing. Each step reminded her of the words he had spoken on their wedding night. "I will never touch you again." They echoed not as rejection anymore, but as humiliation. Yet something strange happened as time went on. She stopped crying every night. Instead, she started observing. She noticed how the staff flinched when Margaret entered a room. How Victor's associates deferred to him not out of respect, but fear. She began to understand the machinery of power that surrounded her, and how fragile it truly was beneath its polish. During one charity luncheon, Elena stood beside Victor as he spoke about philanthropy with rehearsed sincerity. A donor praised her grace, calling her lucky to have such a strong husband. Victor smiled. Elena smiled too. But something inside her tightened. not in pain but clarity. Later that evening, alone in the library, she wandered among the shelves until her fingers brushed against books on art, finance, contracts, and law. She pulled one free, then another, then more. If this marriage was a transaction, she decided, then she would learn the language of transactions. Her quiet rebellion began there. She read obsessively. She studied business structures. She revisited her old passion for art, sketching late at night when the house slept. She remembered who she had been before she was reduced to an ornament. One afternoon, seeking air, Elena wandered into the estate's botanical gardens. It was the first place that felt alive. Flowers bloomed freely, unapologetically. She sat on a bench and sketched, losing herself in lines and shadows. That was when she heard a voice. "You draw like someone who sees the world deeply." She looked up, startled, and met the gaze of a man with kind eyes and an easy smile. He introduced himself as Daniel Reed, an architect consulting on one of the Langford-sponsored projects. Unlike everyone else, he did not look at her like a possession. They spoke cautiously at first, then more freely. About design. About creativity. About purpose. Elena felt human again. Their meetings became accidental, then expected. Always respectful. Always safe. Daniel never crossed a line, but he reminded her of something she had almost forgotten. Her worth. One evening, Elena returned to the mansion early and heard voices coming from Victor's study. The door was slightly open. She froze when she recognized Victor's voice, warm, intimate in a way he had never been with her. "I can't wait much longer," he said. "The contract protects me. Once the timing is right, I'll end it." A woman laughed softly. "Good," she said. "I'm tired of pretending she doesn't exist." Elena's heart didn't break. It hardened. She stepped away silently. That night, she sat on her bed and stared at the ceiling, something shifting irrevocably inside her. She was not unwanted. She was inconvenient. And that realization changed everything. She began documenting quietly, observing patterns, remembering conversations, understanding leverage. They thought she was weak. They were wrong. The woman they never bothered to know. Elena Hart learned very quickly that invisibility could be a weapon. Once she accepted that no one in the Langford household truly saw her, she stopped trying to be noticed. She moved quietly through the halls, spoke only when necessary, and smiled just enough to satisfy expectations. To Margaret she was obedient. To Victor she was irrelevant. And that was exactly what made her dangerous. Every morning followed the same rigid pattern. Breakfast with Margaret, where every sentence felt like a test she was never meant to pass. Charity planning meetings filled with empty praise and carefully constructed lies. Evenings spent alone, listening to the mansion breathe around her like a living thing that tolerated her presence but never embraced it. But beneath that surface compliance, Elena was changing. She woke earlier than everyone else now, using the quiet hours to read contracts, financial journals, and business case studies she found hidden in the library. She learned how foundations were structured, how donations were routed, how reputations were built and destroyed. She memorized names, dates, and connections. The more she learned, the more she realized how much of Victor's power depended not on strength, but perception. And perception, she understood, could be rewritten. Her meetings with Daniel Reed continued, always brief, always respectful. They spoke in the botanical gardens, among things that grew freely without permission. Daniel never asked questions she wasn't ready to answer. He simply listened, offering space rather than solutions. One afternoon, as Elena sketched the arch of a rose trellis, Daniel watched her quietly before speaking. "You know," he said gently, "people underestimate stillness. They think quiet means empty." Elena smiled faintly. "Quiet is where you hear the truth," she replied. He looked at her then, not with pity but recognition. Back at the mansion, Victor's behavior grew colder. He spoke of divorce casually now, no longer hiding his contempt. At one dinner, surrounded by investors, he joked about how some people are better suited to decoration than contribution. Laughter followed. Elena laughed too. But she remembered every face. Margaret, sensing control slipping, tightened her grip. She criticized Elena's posture, her speech, her choices. Nothing was ever enough. Yet Elena noticed something new behind Margaret's sharp eyes. Fear. Victor's affair became less discreet. Elena documented everything, quietly, carefully. Dates. Transactions. Names. She did not confront him. She did not cry. She waited. The turning point came unexpectedly. At a large charity gala hosted by the Langford Foundation, Elena was instructed to remain silent while Victor announced a major arts initiative, one she recognized immediately. It was identical to a program she had proposed weeks earlier and been dismissed for. As Victor spoke passionately about supporting creativity, Elena felt something inside her settle into calm resolve. After the speech, a board member approached her privately. "You have a remarkable eye for art," the woman said. "Your name was mentioned in connection with the program." Elena paused, then spoke carefully. "I would love to discuss it further." That conversation changed everything. Within weeks, Elena was quietly invited into meetings Victor didn't know about. Her insight impressed people who mattered. Her calm confidence disarmed skeptics. They began to ask her opinions, seek her perspective. Victor noticed the shift, but too late. One evening he confronted her. "You're getting ideas?" he said coldly. "Don't forget who you are." Elena met his gaze calmly. "I know exactly who I am." For the first time Victor looked uncertain. That night, Elena stood at her window watching the city lights flicker in the distance. She was no longer afraid of what was coming. She was ready. The fall of the untouchable. The night Victor Langford lost control began the same way every other carefully choreographed evening of his life did, with cameras, champagne, and applause. The Langford Foundation's annual gala was the crown jewel of the social season. Politicians, donors, journalists, and cultural leaders packed the grand hall, eager to be seen supporting progress and artistic empowerment. The banners behind the stage displayed Victor's name in bold lettering, his legacy framed as benevolence and vision. Elena stood beside him, dressed in understated elegance. Gone were the extravagant gowns chosen by Margaret. Tonight she wore something simple, confident, and intentional. Her posture was calm. Her expression unreadable. Victor barely glanced at her. He believed the night belonged to him. As the program began, Victor delivered his speech flawlessly. He spoke about opportunity, about lifting unheard voices, about dignity and respect. The irony was almost unbearable, but Elena remained still, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Applause thundered. Then something unexpected happened. The host returned to the stage and smiled warmly. "And now," she said, "we would like to invite Mrs. Elena Langford to join us." Victor's head snapped toward Elena. She met his eyes and stood. A murmur rippled through the room. Elena walked to the stage, each step measured, controlled. She accepted the microphone without hesitation. "Thank you," she began softly. "This foundation speaks often about empowerment. Tonight I'd like to show you what that truly looks like." The screen behind her lit up. Documents appeared. Financial breakdowns. Emails. Timelines. Gasps echoed across the hall. Elena's voice remained steady as she spoke, not accusing, not emotional, just factual. She outlined misallocated funds, conflicts of interest, affairs hidden behind charitable fronts. The narrative Victor had built so carefully began to fracture in real time. Victor stood frozen. Margaret's face drained of color. Elena turned slightly, addressing the board. "These programs matter," she said. "But integrity matters more. And silence is how injustice survives." The room erupted into chaos. Reporters scrambled. Board members whispered urgently. Security moved, but it was too late. Victor tried to speak. No one listened. By morning, headlines exploded. Sponsors withdrew. Investigations launched. The Langford name, once untouchable, became synonymous with scandal. Victor confronted Elena in private that night, rage cracking through his composure. "You humiliated me," he shouted. Elena looked at him calmly. "No," she said. "You humiliated yourself. I only told the truth." He reached for control. She stepped away. The power had shifted. She touched her own freedom. The silence after the scandal was different from the silence Elena had known before. This one did not suffocate her. It did not press against her chest or follow her through hallways like a shadow. It was clean, open, honest. The Langford mansion felt smaller now. Victor retreated into himself, pacing like a caged animal, making frantic calls that went unanswered. Margaret no longer issued commands. She watched the news in stunned disbelief, her carefully constructed authority crumbling with each new headline. The staff moved cautiously, no longer afraid, just waiting. Elena packed slowly. She folded each dress with intention, not haste. She took nothing extravagant, only what belonged to her. Her sketchbooks, her notebooks, her dignity. Victor confronted her one last time as she reached the door. "You think you've won?" he asked bitterly. "You'll regret this." Elena turned calmly. "I already lived the regret," she said. "This is freedom." The divorce was swift, public, final. Victor lost more than his marriage. He lost influence, trust, and the image that had protected him for years. The board removed him. The foundation restructured. Margaret withdrew from public life entirely, her power dissolved by exposure. Elena moved into a small apartment filled with light. She returned to art, to teaching, to purpose. The foundation, rebuilt under new leadership, invited her to help guide its creative initiatives. Not as a figurehead, as a leader. She accepted on her own terms. One afternoon, as she stood in the botanical gardens sketching once more, Daniel joined her quietly. "You did this," he said softly. Elena smiled. "I survived," she replied. "Then I chose myself." She was no longer someone's ornament. She was her own legacy.